Sean, your voice sounds a little different today.
He's good at that.
Figured I'd change it up.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
I do think we need to do the minutes from the last meeting. That was on the agenda.
Andrea, you're muted.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. Can we have approval of the minutes from the last meeting?
Yeah, I thought the minutes reflected our conversation well. I'd move approval.
Okay, a second.
Second.
Thanks, Tim. Anybody opposed? Not hearing anybody, so that passes. Anything else? I don't have the agenda open in front of me. That's a problem, and it's not on the screen. So, anything else before we move on to the master plan, Mark?
Nope, I'm looking up the agenda right now.
Okay. So I just come from another meeting, and have not got my agenda.
The agenda is approval of the minutes, and then review of the draft master plan, and then public comments.
Public comments, and then yeah, okay, and within that, next steps as well. So we'll talk about. Okay, I'm passing on to John now.
All right, so I think what we'll do at this point is the same format as last time. Is we'll have Sean walk us through just chapter by chapter, and he'll go through just to introduce and get on the record and orient one chapter at a time. Then when he's done with that chapter, we can go back and answer any questions or anything or comments or discuss any aspect of that chapter before we go on to the next chapter. So I think we did the first 6 chapters last time. We'll do the next this time. And I think with that, Sean, we'll use the same format as last time. So go ahead and start with chapter 7, and I will just walk through them one at a time.
Sean, if I might jump in ahead of time, several members submitted comments to me. We used the Tim Trowbridge sheet to finalize those. I've also received comments from Parks and Public Works and County Engineer and Manitou Springs and City of Colorado Springs. So there's a final tally sheet that we're compiling based upon the comments that the committee provides and the ones we've received. We asked people to provide those comments as of last night or finalized last night. So any comments we don't get will probably have to be in the public review comment once we release the document. Yep. I'm happy to ultimately share those after we finish the meeting today with the committee. Nina's helping type that sheet up because she's quicker at the draw. So we can share that.
Perfect. And we have an internal meeting to go through those later this afternoon as well. So good. Okay, chapter 7 is community facilities, really focusing on local government action items and then stuff specific to public safety, looking at like emergency services and then education. So the local government section really centers around multi-jurisdictional coordination, recognizing that the county is not and should not be the only entity implementing the recommendations throughout this plan. It's going to require coordination with the other municipalities in the county, the different districts, both from fire or metropolitan districts to school districts, coordination with the military installations, the utility providers, just the plethora of different groups that do work in the county and that lead their own services or departments. Public participation, again, looking at ways to continue to include the public throughout the process and planning efforts throughout El Paso County, and then a section specific to taxes and funding sources for improvements.
Can I stop you real quick, Sean? And this is Doug. I have kind of an overarching question on several, it pertains to several of these chapters. There's a number of non-objective statements made throughout these. And I don't necessarily disagree, but I think we ought to at least acknowledge, maybe a better description would be editorial as opposed to factual. So like in the taxes section, it says, ultimately, the revenue received from Tabor is inadequate to fund county needs. That is a conclusion that a number of county residents would not agree with. So, and there's going to be other examples that I would potentially highlight, but I would like to hear the response on John or whoever, that it seems to me there's a number of those types of statements in there when you're talking about response time, sheriff's office, school districts, school funding, a lot of
I think a lot of these sections of the plans involve a lot of entities, groups, organizations, jurisdictions that are not the county. So we've had extensive conversations with all of them, and have gotten a lot of materials from them. So if there's a statement in here that is inaccurate, we need to correct it. If it needs to be reworded, we can reword it. Sometimes I think some of them may be accurate, but people don't want to hear them, or they might take issue with the way it's worded. So if something is inaccurate, we want to correct that. We don't want to be stating that. This has been reviewed pretty thoroughly, so I don't know if there's any incorrect. I'm hoping there's not any incorrect statements in here. If something needs to be reworded, we can do that. But we don't want to have anything in here that is wrong, or a misstatement.
I didn't say it was wrong. I said it was editorial in nature.
Well, go back to like the funding one. If is it an incorrect statement, or does it need to be reworded?
If I'm the only one on the committee that shares that concern, then maybe it doesn't even need to be discussed. But the first sentence of the second paragraph there, ultimately, the revenue received from Tabor is inadequate to fund county needs such as road maintenance. And I don't know that that's a factual statement. I'm not saying it's wrong, but
Right.
I'm not sure that's right.
Yeah.
Doug,
Doug,
this
this
is
is Tom. I had many of the same observations, and the sheet I sent to Mark has quite a few of those very similar things where they are certainly widely held opinions, but certainly not objective truth. I agree with you wholeheartedly that there are many things that seem to come from the only possible solution is raising taxes, for example, and without a discussion of perhaps reducing spending as another alternative, or prioritizing what the county does spend its tax revenue on. So I do think we need to address this.
This is Tim. I agree with all of that as well. Yeah, as far as I know, there's no fund labeled Tabor. There are
Yeah.
taxes. There are taxes collected in excess of what the Tabor formula would allow, but as far as I know, there's no Tabor fund per se.
John, is this intended to be that any Tabor overage that we've retained in the past? Where's this statement coming from?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just the process there entirely. Craig, I know Victoria's on the call. Do we want her to maybe speak to some of that road maintenance components?
I think what I'm hearing from Tom and Tim and Doug is if we're going to make statements like that, we at least need to assign ownership. Who is saying that? And I think in some cases it probably is factual. I think we can work with Public
Right.
Works to say the Tabor overages that we keep are not going to touch the road maintenance deficit that we have. Because we can put in the number and say, this is the estimated cost of what that would be. And here's the amount that we got last year when we retained the overage. I mean, that is factual in nature, but if we're going to say things like this, we at least need to provide those statistics to back it up.
Yeah, I think some of these statements may need context, that based on current revenue generated by whatever and the current or projected maintenance costs for the county, current level of incoming funds from Tabor do not cover the cost. We can, if we have to reword them to state or provide context, so we're not drawing conclusions as much as giving the context factual statements, we need to do that.
I don't know if it's
And maybe-
that simple.
maybe-
I'm not-
Maybe categorizing it as based on current county spending.
Yes,
If all of the Tabor overages were to be applied to the road maintenance deficit, this is what it would look like. This is what the deficit currently is estimated at.
Right.
And this is the amount that we've gotten in the past with the Tabor overages under a static situation of spending by the county. If we didn't change any other spending habits or appropriations, then and everything stayed the same, even if we applied all of the Tabor overages to the roadway maintenance fund, it would still be woefully deficient.
Yeah, we need to provide context that's not being provided.
Yeah, otherwise this reads like opinion. I agree with
Right.
the group here.
Totally get that.
You know, but we have all those numbers. I mean, we can pull those really easily.
but I think you need to address the people that are going to say, yeah, that's assuming the county has all their priorities right today with how they allocate their budget.
No.
And
Basically,
because you would get a vociferous argument, Craig, from a number of county residents as to whether or not the county has appropriately prioritized road funding in their budget.
Completely agree. And I think you could say based on recent budgeting practices by the county, this is the scenario. I mean, you have to have a starting point to some degree and say the Tabor overages is not the answer based upon current practice of budgeting. It's maybe part of the answer, but it's not all the answer. I think that's what this is trying to get to.
Right.
Does that make sense? Everybody agree with that approach? Putting a little more context to it and providing that background that, yeah, it's the county gets to, in a lot of cases, not all cases, because some of it's mandated, but we get to pick how we're going to split up our funds. And right now, this is how we're choosing to do it. And based upon that, even with the Tabor overages, we're not going to touch it on roadway maintenance.
So
And that becomes more of a factual statement at that point.
So if the committee identifies anything like this in these chapters going forward that they think are more opinion or anecdotal or need context, or let us know and we can do anything from remove them, amend them, rewrite them. And we'll take each one of them one by one and make sure it's what it needs to be.
And Mark, we can get those numbers from Sherry based upon current budgeting and what the overages would have been or are projected to be moving forward even. Some of that's tough to do because we don't know what the revenue is going to be, but we can they estimate all those out, I think, to 5 years at this point, but some of that's kind of, you know, reading the tea leaves at year 5 and year 4. If we have another pandemic, it pretty much blows all those numbers up. Doug, I think that's a very valuable point. And like John said, as we move through this, where you see those, please highlight them, anybody in the group. As we don't want this to be editorializing. It needs to be based on current circumstances.
This is Mark. We see a little bit of that in the school section as well, that we may need some modification.
Right.
Yeah, that was another place that jumped out at Mark.
Okay. So then moving on, public safety, looking at fire and emergency services, those response times. This includes a service area analysis based on drive times and standards from the, I believe it's the NFPA within the county. And then water access, similarly for sheriff services.
So I have a
excuse
comment
me.
on water.
Okay.
And I don't know how granular this is, but when again, these are pretty broad statements that are being made. The continued development of outlying areas stretches the capacity. I think that's all fair. After serving residences with water for all necessary functions such as drinking and cleaning, the priority for water supply and new development should be given to fire hydrants. Well, I get that in areas that have central services. But a lot of the county doesn't have central services. You're not going to get a fire hydrant. And you're saying that that should be a priority to have a fire hydrant over a landscape. I'm not sure that that's accurate from a broad sense, because I'm not sure you're going to put a fire hydrant out on a 5-acre well and septic.
I think it probably is fire suppression in general, because we do have cisterns that go in.
Yeah, but Craig, you know, the thing, and I know there's one fire district that particularly is hung up on cisterns, but it says this may mean a separate well or cistern reserved exclusively for fire suppression within all new subdivisions. So we were the developer of High Forest Ranch, and all those houses had cisterns. During the Black Forest fire, you know how many cisterns got turned on? Zero. Not one, not 100, zero. And I would submit that the county's never used it, or the fire districts have never used that cistern. And so this is making, again, in my opinion, an editorial comment. The cost benefit, when we're fighting affordability every step of the way around here, and lumber just went up another $7,000 a house, I would argue that the cistern's a complete waste of money. And they don't use it. And the reason they don't use it is there's not enough water to do fire suppression. You might be able to save the house.
The challenge, you know, we have, Doug, is they have that authority to request it. Whether they use it or not, obviously the county has no control over that.
Understood, but we don't necessarily as a county have to say that that's a good policy.
So should our policy not to provide water for fire suppression? I mean, what would the wording be, I guess, is
I don't know why that's, I don't think that sentence adds anything to this whole document. You've already said that, and I think you have to modify it, that it's in centralized services. You've already said prioritize fire hydrants. In the rest of it, the only thing that people do is they manage it through tree management or wildland management. They don't manage it with cisterns.
The wording down below does say this may mean, doesn't say it has to mean. Where the nearest water source, centralized water source is, could be 20s of miles away. I mean, it could be a long ways away, Doug.
It could be.
I mean, it's not just in the timbered areas that maybe you're developing in, or in even the urbanized or near urbanized areas. This has to apply across the county. And if we have something that's, you know, R5 zoned and there's a subdivision, if there isn't a cistern, that may be the only source of water literally for 10 miles.
And in that circumstance, I wouldn't disagree with you at all. It's just, my concern was there's an implication that this is a good policy. I would submit it's a flawed policy. In the example you just used, I would agree with it. But if I'm developing adjacent on county grounds adjacent to centralized services, and you know that's where they're going to grab water, if in the event of a fire, to require a cistern on a 2.5-acre lot, it's a.
If it's in close proximity, I agree.
I'm going to intervene a bit here. I can understand the discussion, but I think my concern is it seems a level of detail that is unnecessary for a master plan document. That's my concern. I can hear the pros and cons of both of what you're saying, but the fact that we're getting into such a detailed level of discussion on something in a master plan suggests to me that it's a level, it's too much detail for a master plan. It's I mean, those sort of things will be covered by code. And I don't know how much of this is actually addressed in the water master plan as well anyway. But it just does seem like it's just not master plan worthy. It's a code issue.
Well, maybe the best wording is just say this may mean providing alternative fire suppression methods or infrastructure, which could include, not saying it, but it could include cisterns. It could include, you know, more fire stations. Don't know.
It may need to be more of a blanket statement if we want it, rather than not have it in here, and say something along the lines of, the county, working cooperatively with water districts, developers, and other stakeholders, must ensure, regardless of location of development, that fire protection is provided, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's a way to frame it so that the priority is established without the exact means by which it's served.
And I would say, instead of saying the county must, I would say the county should coordinate with the fire districts
Right.
to ensure that adequate fire suppression service can be provided.
And I would list the water districts, and I would list developers as a key player in that as well. That the county should cooperate with the water districts, developers, and others to ensure this is provided. And then,
actually,
as opposed to identifying how it should be provided.
The changes we just made to the code pretty much say that. It's really a negotiation between the developers and the fire districts as to what is the appropriate thing to provide. The county just.
And that kind of goes to my point. It's in the code. It's something we have to do. Developers have to provide have to discuss with the fire department when we do a development. So I think a more generalized statement, as John suggested there, would be probably cover people's concerns.
We can do that.
Isn't the final sentence sufficient? Why can't we just strike the sentence with the cistern? I mean, the final sentence of the paragraph says, continue to improve coordination with fire districts to ensure that new development provide appropriate fire suppression and water supplies.
I don't think it's just the fire districts, though. I think it's also the development community, and the centralized water providers.
Yeah.
Well, I think if you just add those in there, then we'll probably good.
Yeah, we'll modify the section, remove the sentence that's problematic, and amend that last sentence. But we sort of got the gist. We can take care of this, no problem.
Okay. I did have a comment on the prior page. If we're done with this. Yeah, in the response times, there's a sentence about studying things and improving the roads. Isn't that part of the master transportation plan? Isn't there something in there? Yeah, there it says an assessment of the existing road network and service nodes should be completed. Is there not something in the county master transportation plan that addresses that? Is there not information we could pull from that?
There is, and I would think that maybe it's just should be periodically updated, because we have it today.
Yeah, so maybe a reference to that plan here. If that assessment already exists, just point to it, say it's over there. That's all I was thinking.
I don't think there's a full assessment. I think that's the problem. Is the plan assesses some of the more pertinent roadways, but it's not comprehensive. And that's one thing that DPW is working on right now.
I would almost change it to the sentence to saying a periodic assessment, or, on a regular interval, an assessment of the existing road networks. It's not a do it once and forget about it sort of thing. It's something that sort of has to be, the county's going to be changing with development so much over the next couple of decades. An assessment's going to have to be, or different areas of assessment are going to have to be done on a more regular basis to different degrees. Yeah.
I agree, John. That's fine.
Yeah. Okay.
Moving on, the education section, again outlining the plethora of districts, coordination among those districts, and opportunities for collaboration with the county for capacity needs, looking at growth accommodation and safety.
So I had a couple of comments. One, since you wrote this in November, we effectively eliminated Gallagher. So I think you can take any reference to Gallagher out. What they have done now is they've permanently fixed the residential assessment rate in the state of Colorado at 7.15%. The problem with Gallagher was every time that more and more residential occurred with not as much commercial, it skewed the percentages, and so it would make the residential rate continuously drop. Well, we're fixed now. unless we get like 2/3 of the legislature to overturn it or to increase it. And so I think that needs to be cleaned up, that paragraph, which is I think your 4th paragraph under education. And, you know, again, some basic stuff that implies that the school districts are stressed, et cetera, et cetera. And that's probably true, although there are several school districts that aren't. But there's more than one way to fix the problem. I mean, the question I've always had is why do we have 47 school districts with 47 superintendents and 47 administrations for a town our size? You know, consolidation of school districts, administration, and overhead would also be an alternative to fixing some of our quote unquote school funding challenges. So again, that's editorial, I realize that, but so's some of this.
Yeah, we hear you. The challenge is, so point out anything in here that we've got to, like the other sections in water or fire suppression, have to fix. Again, the biggest challenge is the county has little purview over things like school districts and consolidation, and these are issues that sort of plague the entire nation. And we're left with having not direct control over these, but indirect interaction with these other districts and entities. And that's the challenge of this. So to some degree, we're left to navigate the best we can within the structure that already exists for these other institutions. And like you indicated, a lot of this stuff goes up to the state or beyond. It's not even in the county, and it's certainly not in the county government's purview. So it's challenging. So we're trying to balance that. We want to make sure we get it right. And even though we can look at these other entities and see things we wish or think should be done differently, that's so far beyond our ability to even comment or do anything about it in this plan. It's challenging. So
I agree,
yeah.
but you're putting in here a lot of stuff that the county really has no control over. And to that extent, so under growth accommodation, to accommodate this growth, the county should partner with school districts, make sure that they have appropriate athletic fields, make sure they're built in the right spots. County doesn't have any say over any of that.
Well, approval of the development. Whenever a development takes place, whether it's public or private within a jurisdiction, at some point, those two things have to merge into approval of the project, to making sure things get accommodated. To that extent, we need
the school districts in the state of Colorado say, I either want fees or I want land. It's their call. And they work with the developers, and the county, Craig's staff doesn't say, oh, we think we need to pull 40 acres out here and have a school site. That's not
no, I'm not saying that, but when they decide what site they want to go on and propose a school, they have to coordinate with the county to get everything in place. So the county is one of the players at the table when that takes place. So we're not driving that, but we are a player once those wheels get put in motion. We're not determining the site, but if a 40 or 60 acre site gets selected by a school to develop a new campus, the county will be involved somewhere along the way in that process of that campus getting developed.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're not driving it.
I get it, but you're suggesting in here that we should, as a county, we should anticipate needs over the next 10 to 20 years. In addition, it should be considered a living document. It needs to be, I would tell you the county shouldn't spend one nickel of resource on any of that, because that's what the school districts do. And instead they should pave some more roads.
Yeah, I think that, and I don't read this to say we're spending money on it, but I think it's the county should support long range planning efforts of the school districts as appropriate, which is what we have done. We've collaborated with District 38 on some of their long range planning efforts very recently. But Doug, I don't read this to say the county is going to fund all that, but we can make that abundantly clear when we rewrite.
Well,
I just view it that the county is a.
You could take this whole paragraph out and put it in the one sentence you just said, Craig.
Yeah, and that's really our role, and that you could even expand that to say, which may include transfer of dedicated school land, because we hold that land on behalf of the school districts until the appropriate time.
Right.
I mean, that's just a factual statement of what actually happens. That's practice. But I think working with them kind of through the lens of this plan on some of their long range plans isn't entirely appropriate, but it's supporting those efforts, not funding those efforts.
Right, and we'll make that clear. The intent is not that the county should be doing any of the financial lifting of the school district. So we'll make sure that that gets corrected. We just want to be a cooperative and appropriately supportive partner in a school accommodating its needs over time, not driving that initiative and certainly not paying for those studies. So,
and John, I think also we would definitely be remiss if we didn't identify that the siting of schools has a considerable impact on county infrastructure, particularly roads.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's important that they work with us on where those locations are and how they gain access, because it does have a significant impact, not only on the infrastructure's integrity, whether or not it gets destroyed over the course of time, but it also can create some safety issues.
Oh yeah, I mean, just the drop-off, pickup, getting to and from logistics of any school is a challenge. So yeah, so our drive here is to be cooperative partners and influence the school where we can to make good decisions and cooperate and support, not to drive and or finance any of this. So we'll rework this section.
Any other comments around education before we move on to the infrastructure chapter?
I don't know about anybody else, but I think the map of all the school districts is a great map. That map right there.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, it tells a pretty robust story, in my opinion.
Yep, I agree.
I like it.
That, and it's really pretty. We love pretty maps.
Objective one.
This is Tom again. One thing that is missing though, and I like the maps, but the number of school districts I think is, well, it's relevant, but less relevant than the number of students supported or who are educated in those districts. And I think those numbers, for context, we talk about growth in the county. If we have a baseline, and I didn't see it anywhere, maybe it's in there, but I looked back to try to find how many students are served by those districts. Not necessarily individually, but just as a baseline number.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tom, and that was my thought. And also not just who they're serving now, but what's the anticipated growth in those districts, because I think we're all aware that District 49 is probably, I think it's the fastest growing district, and there's a kind of the big portion of Banning Lewis Ranch in there and lots of other communities that are growing rapidly. So I think that information will be helpful if it's not in the main document in an appendix or something.
Yeah, I think we would agree with both of those statements. The trouble is coordinating with the 17 districts to obtain that information. Some of them are more willing than others to share not only existing metrics, but future growth and capacity they often keep closer to the vest. So we have attempted to coordinate with these districts. I know we have data from some of them that are more open to sharing that information, but others certainly, again, are less apt to provide particularly those capacity metrics. So we will do our best to reach out again to see if we can obtain that information, but don't want to promise that we'll be able to actually get it to put in here.
Isn't it also some of the districts cross county boundaries as well, so that'll be hard to disaggregate?
Yeah, there's that component too.
Maybe Sean, at a minimum, we can get numbers for some of the faster growing districts like 49, 38, maybe 20, and at least have those more for the urbanized areas that are likely to see more pressures on capacity.
Okay, yeah, we can work with you and Mark to get those specific districts and start to coordinate.
I don't know what getting numbers for Yoder is going to do for anybody. I think it's really more pertinent to some of these urbanized areas.
But I
Yeah,
think we should,
even if you overlay this map with those residential growth prioritization areas or priority areas, you can see where the increase in students is going to happen, which districts. So.
that's a
Well, and
good
that might
point.
be the funny thing about it is they may not even see the growth that we see coming. So if you ask them
Yeah.
for projections on growth, they may be totally flawed because they don't have the insight on some of the areas that we're showing for future
Right.
growth.
But you overlap those, and I'm not saying we actually create that map. I mean, but if you overlap those priority development areas with this map, which is going to show where residential growth is anticipated to occur to the tune of 200,000 plus people, you can see which districts are going to need new schools or expanded facilities or whatever.
Yep. Any other questions, comments for Chapter 7?
These are all great comments. I really appreciate everybody being straightforward because these are things we want to make sure we get right.
Yeah, so keep them coming. And any sentence, any weird wording, anything that you think we need to address, let us know. So that's what this group is for.
So Chapter 8, infrastructure, really focuses on those specific needs throughout the county related to water, wastewater, gas, electricity, alternative energy, and telecommunications. Again, this chapter pulls from a lot of existing work done by the county or partner organizations, the Water Master Plan probably being the biggest one. So a lot of the information in here is represented from those previously completed documents.
Sean, I just noticed this. Do we need to have some kind of disclaimer up front that this chapter is not intended to address transportation because it's addressed in a separate chapter? Obviously, when you talk about infrastructure, it's the first thing everybody thinks of.
I guess I would put that back to the group. We can certainly add that.
Because if you just pick this chapter up by itself, you'd say, well, where's the transportation?
We can word that into this intro paragraph in some way, shape, or form for sure. Just saying, while transportation is a key part of infrastructure, transportation related components for the county are addressed in chapter whatever, and just move on.
Yeah.
You can do that. Yep.
Yeah, I'll just walk through this and feel free to stop me whenever you have something for these specific pages.
It's Chapter 6.
Yeah, transportation is 6. So water, again, the master plan is the key driving document for this chapter, particularly this section.
So I have some comments before you go on, but I feel like I'm throwing a lot of comments out there.
Go for it.
Go for it, Doug.
The supply demand gap and the bullet point that starts with encourage the submission of a water supply plan, documenting an adequate supply of water to serve a proposed development at the earliest stage of the development process is allowed under state law. Again, to me, that's not a master plan discussion at all. We already have to do that. And the earliest we can do it is when we have preliminary plan. So if you do it at preliminary plan, there's an incentive to prove your water supply at preliminary plan, because then you can get administrative review of your final plats. But this is already codified. This is already part of the process. And I don't even know what value it adds, because there's nothing more. And frankly, one of the biggest challenges the county has is doing water reviews. So I don't even think it needs to be in there. That's my comment. The last bullet point on that page, I don't understand the wording. Continue to limit urban level development to those areas not served by centralized utilities. I don't think that works. You're saying,
that's bad.
Right?
Yeah.
You're saying
That's a typo.
Continue to limit to those not served. So I think you're saying to those areas served by centralized utilities, right?
Right,
I
not
think,
shouldn't
I
be in
think
there.
originally we had a double negative there and we only took out one of them.
Yeah, that's, I mean, I'm not being critical. It jumped out at me. And then I was curious, when we start talking about water, and this is similar to a comment like I had about transportation, and there's no mention of the, and I know it's addressed in the minutes and it'll probably be taken care of, but there's no mention of the fact that new development has to pay impact fees. Why is there no discussion of the fact that El Paso County uses a 300-year water supply rule that is 3 times more conservative than that used by every other county in the state? I think that's a really important factor for people that are our county residents to know, that we have to prove up a 300-year supply, not a 100-year supply like they do everywhere else. And so I think they should know that the county's already taken a very conservative approach to development that relies on non-renewable water supplies. And so I thought that was an important notion that was completely missed.
We can make a reference to that. It's discussed in extensive detail in the water master plan, which is incorporated by reference by this plan, but we can add a sentence that highlights that.
But not everybody's gonna, I mean, I would submit that damn near nobody's gonna read the water master plan, besides water providers and your staff. But I think a number of people will read this.
Yeah, I agree. So can we go back to your first comment about the water supply document? Because the water master plan was adopted as an element of the master plan, the discussion about water can happen as early as the sketch plan or the PUD. So a development could submit their water supply planning documents at that stage. You don't have to wait to the preliminary plan stage. And that helps with a finding of consistency with the master plan at the sketch plan and zoning stage. So limiting it to only saying it has to come at the preliminary plan is not accurate. Saying that it can come at the preliminary plan, that is accurate. But if a developer needs to, because it's an issue with a certain development, we've seen that as recent as a few months ago with a development northeast of Falcon. The need to prove consistency with the water master plan may be there at the sketch plan and zoning stage. The actual water resources report.
I don't disagree. I'm saying I don't think this adds any value, this whole statement.
I would like to take a stab at reworking this because I think there is value gained, certainly for the elected officials and the planning commission, in knowing what the water situation is at the zoning stage or at the sketch plan stage. It does not necessarily mean a full-blown water resources report, but some water documents supporting the requested action does add value and does help lead towards consistency with the overall master plan. So Doug, I'd like to take a stab at reworking this bullet.
Yeah, have at it. But Craig, also, I think sometimes we tend to forget that the marketplace isn't stupid. I'm not going to spend a ton of money on a zoning and concept plan if I'm not pretty convinced I have the underlying water. I may not bring it into your county until I know what my density is, because that's the problem with doing it at sketch plan. That's very conceptual. Once I have a preliminary plan, I know how many lots I have. I know how many acre feet I need, et cetera. But I'm not going to go spend the money to zone and concept plan something if I'm not virtually 100% convinced that I've got the water to accommodate my proposal.
The difference is that's information that you have. That's not information that the Planning Commission Board of County Commissioners has. So I think there's a connection there that maybe we kind of bridge that gap a little bit.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and I think it's worth reiterating here, most of these recommendations outlined in this section are pulled directly from the water master plan. So it's largely a synthesis and carryover from that document, just to reiterate it.
And Sean, I think in this case, that's verbatim on these bullets, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Yeah, Craig ignored my comments on the water master plan as well.
I think you meant to say the Planning Commission ignored your comments. So I don't know how much we can do to change this, Doug, because I think this is pulled straight from the water master plan. That's a good comment, Sean. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
But Doug, not to hold us up here, but I think within this section, what I said about the importance of providing that upfront understanding of what the water situation is for a certain development at the sketch plan and PUD and prelims or zoning stage is important to making those decisions. So even though I don't feel compelled to change that bullet because it is straight from the water master plan, I think adding a sentence or two into the text here might be beneficial. And that might help clarify that bullet as well. So when I say I'm probably looking at Mark to reword it.
Well,
then-
on water, I would note, even after the water master plan had been done and approved through the public involvement we had at the start of this project, people still raised that issue substantially as a part of their comments.
My comment on that previous page was about the landscaping. There's already a pretty hefty chapter on landscaping in the land development code, isn't there? So aren't these xeriscaping and other water efficient techniques mentioned in that? I didn't bother to go look, sorry.
The code doesn't
They are not.
set policy for what needs to be adjusted in the land development code. It is the regulation. And I'm glad you brought this up because there's actually an RFP out there right now to rewrite our landscaping standards to address those bullets that are identified there. So in terms of implementation, I'm cheating a little on implementation to say we should go do this when we're already doing it.
I was going to say the current code really address it. So
somewhere, right?
That's the best kind of plan, Craig.
Craig, I think probably in 80% of our plans, because they take, a year to 2 years to develop, depending on the size of the community involved. There's always some piece that early on people say, like, boy, we should just start working on this now. And there are pieces almost always that get implemented before the plan itself gets adopted that recommends the thing that's already now implemented. So.
And Tim, this was an implementation measure of the water master plan. This is just carried forward into the master plan. So if you stay on planning commission long enough, you're going to get to be the guy that decides that or helps decide that.
Cool.
Then recommendations related to water conservation, how they align with land use, and then agriculture uses specifically, water storage and capacity.
Sorry, I have a comment again, and I have much fewer comments after these first couple chapters, so you'll be glad to know. But I wanted to ask Craig to clarify the intention of where you're talking about incorporating water saving actions in land use and development planning in El Paso County. It says discourage individual wells for new subdivisions with 2.5 acres or smaller average lot sizes. Well, as you know, smaller than 2.5, you can't do it anyway. So what is the intention behind this statement? Are you saying that you shouldn't do 2.5 acre lot development anymore? Because I think that also flies in the face of when we talk about trying to do the planning technique where you preserve open space and you cluster 2.5 acres. Maybe it's your use of Black Forest as an example. You got 1,000 acres, you got 5 acre lot requirement, you have 200 lots. You might be better, it might be a better land plan, efficient road use, et cetera, to put 2.5 acre lots there and 500 acres of open space or whatever the math works out to versus, so I was unclear if you were discouraging 2.5 acre lot development.
I think if you read the whole thing, Doug, for one, you can do a well on less than 2.5. It's the septic that's the issue. It's not the well. So you can do a well on less than 2.5. There's wells on less than 2.5 all over the county.
You're right.
I think here we need to say smaller than 2.5 because at 2.5 we would expect a well and probably a septic system. But the rest of this says where there's a reasonable opportunity to connect to existing central system or construct a new central water system.
mine was, the way it was written with 2.5 acre or smaller is what my concern was. The rest of the paragraph I didn't have any issue with, but I think if we change it to for new subdivisions that are smaller than 2.5 acres, then I have no issue.
Yeah, the 2.5 is magic when it comes to septic, really more so than well, as you know. And I use the word magic in the most facetious way possible. Does that address your comment, Doug? Okay.
And storage. Watersheds and environment. Some basic funding information. Education. Projected growth. And then water quality. Stormwater. Supply, and looking at the districts. And then we're out of water. Into
And we don't want to be out of water.
Yeah. And just to note, these sections, the next few sections, gas, electric, alternative energy, we've been coordinating with the sub-consultant to update some of this per staff requirement per Craig and Marks, and some of those have been made. So there's already new information and graphics to go with some of this stuff. But so gas, looking at what's provided through Colorado Springs, and then Black Hills, emphasizing, the importance of Black Hills within the unincorporated part of the county. Similar to electric, coordinating what's been done or what's being done by the organizations outside of CSU to provide electric services.
This is Tim. So I like this map. It's very pretty, but it's the only one that's not El Paso County. Why is it a statewide map and not El Paso County?
That is a data issue. So the gas one will also have a similar map in the revised draft. This is pulled directly from the State Department.
These are maps that we're referencing, not maps that we're producing. So this is like, citing a graph from the US Census website. You cite the graph. This is a map from another entity in another document. We're citing the map as a reference or as a source, a data source. We didn't generate it, so.
Tim, some of the layers for the Mountain View, they're just not available, and they could care less about giving them to us, quite frankly.
No, I get that. It's just, and thanks for explaining it. It's just, you're going through this whole document and they're all El Paso County maps until they're not. So
I wonder if we could blow up.
What we may want to do, Sean, on this is maybe down below, just put source : Colorado Electric Utility Service, whatever. So it's sort of like you're sourcing a data image or a data set. You source the reference. The other graphics we've produced, this is from somebody else, so we may want to title and source this underneath, not just title it. I think that'd be a good idea.
Really, all you're getting out of this, Tim, is it's CSU and it's MVA. I mean, in large part, that's the county situation.
Right.
But maybe blowing up the area that shows El Paso County would be beneficial, because it, outside
or
of
maybe just put a highlight circle over El Paso County, something like that.
Just put a red outline around the county or something like that, and then labeling it below the map. That's not a bad thing.
As long as it doesn't cut off the labels, I think that's good.
We'll work on that. We can do that.
Yeah, that shouldn't be too difficult.
Some of the maps that we'd like to have, they're just not available.
Center alternative energy, with solar being the largest available opportunity. We have revised this to discuss wind energy in a little bit more detail here, just emphasizing the constraints within the county right now for wind production.
Sean, we had a comment from one of the members about nuclear as an alternate energy. I'm not sure we should include nuclear. I think the chance of having nuclear in this area is way remote.
Well, I guess you put a statement in here is that other alternative energy sources or facilities are considered, the county should work to appropriately locate. I don't know that the county ought to be putting in their statement specifically about nuclear energy. That seems like a pretty big conceptual commitment or even approach. I don't know, Craig, what do you think? I wouldn't do it, but.
Yeah, I think it's not even an alternative energy discussion. It's just the siting of energy generation facilities should be carefully considered
Yep.
and appropriately located, something like that.
Yeah, I think that's it without getting into what those energy facilities could be.
Yeah, or
Well,
where they should be, because trying to talk about where they should go is almost worse than saying what they could be.
It's an impossibility. Some uses don't fall on the spectrum or the normal curve of figuring out where stuff should go. That is somebody somewhere in a dark room somewhere deciding what facility is needed for this area and then poking around saying it's got to go here. There's no way to predict where those things need to go or what they're going to be. There's no way. So can't map
well,
that.
this is Tom, and I sent that nuclear comment in there because it illustrates, I think, the point that Doug made at the very outset. There are some alternatives that are discussed at great length and in fact are recommended or seem to be the solution, and there are some things that are just not discussed at all. And that's a flaw that I saw in these last several chapters, that there are very popular positions, political and policy positions that are out there today, and those are pushed very heavily, I thought, in the last part of this document, to the exclusion of other just as reasonable, maybe not in this case, but certainly in the tax and spend discussion, raise taxes is pushed, but spend less is not. Solar and wind is pushed, but nuclear is not, even though you can find just as, the arguments for efficiency and renewability and everything else are just as strong on the nuclear side. Obviously not something to fall on a sword about, but I wanted to highlight again and go back to, I think, what I think is the most relevant point or the most significant part of Doug's initial comment is this, at least this half of the plan needs to have to be read with a very critical eye to make sure that we're even-handed throughout.
Right.
John, maybe wording that is all options for energy generation should be considered and appropriately cited or something like that, to where we're not, so that we are being even-handed. Political winds change all the time.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And some of this is in response to variables or players that are in the market right now in El Paso County versus the theoretical, what if another player did or didn't come into the county as a variable. So I understand what you're saying. We'll go through this and we can reword that, and we'll put the blanket statement in here about, other quote unquote energy production facilities, should be appropriately located to minimize negative impacts on whatever. We'll do that.
And it
Well,
is,
your point is
it is
well taken.
critical to address, it is critical to addressing these in here because
Yeah.
Under 1041, obviously any power plant is going to require a 1041 permit. One of the first criteria under 1041 is consistency with the master plan.
Yep. Yeah. So your point's well taken. We'll reword this.
So the last section is telecommunications. And this is pulled largely again from the broadband study that was completed 2 years ago now.
How is that possible? That was the fastest 2 years.
Yeah.
So just for everybody's reference, that was a study commissioned by the Board of County Commissioners through our IT department.
However,
It's not,
this is Mark, however, it was not a topical element adopted by the master or by the planning commission.
that's correct. So it's in here for reference. It's not being adopted by reference. But it does have great information in it. If you ever get a chance to look at it, it's really informative.
So then next is the military chapter. Similar to the previous two we've kind of looked at. This one is largely based on the JLUIS, that study where our subconsultant HVNA who pulled together the JLUIS is worked on the military chapter. So this is largely just, again, coordinating efforts and ensuring the master plan is pulling the appropriate recommendations from the JLUIS. So regional coordination and the state requirements just at the outset, highlighting where the installations are in the county.
Sean, real quickly, I just want to highlight for everybody that's listening that this is easily the most significant treatment any county planning document has ever given the military installations. If you read the existing small area plans and even the policy plan, there is very little, if any, reference to the military installations. And I think that was an extreme oversight during all of those planning efforts. Obviously, it's an important part of our county. It's an important part of how we should be looking at land use and growth in the future. So I'm so tickled that we did a whole chapter dedicated to the military because I think it's that important.
And Mark Volchev thinks that will be greatly appreciated by the military as well. Thank you very much.
And this is Mark Gebhardt, just for reference, the JLUIS, while Craig participated in it, is not adopted by the Planning Commission either, but it's a reference document utilized in this plan.
Yep. So then we basically break it out by installation specific recommendations related to each one. So Cheyenne Mountain Air Force Station and Schriever, Fort Carson, Peterson.
So I have a question on Peterson. Was there a reason why stormwater management wasn't mentioned here, given its importance?
Specifically, I don't believe it was left out intentionally. We have had some additional coordination since this draft has been pulled together, both with Mark and Craig and the rest of their staff and HBNA on pulling some additional recommendations from the joint land use study in here. I believe it addresses stormwater, but we can go back and double check that.
Well, given the issue with Peterson's use of the fire foam and stuff and the contamination of the groundwater, I would think that would be kind of a glaring hole here on this section if we didn't at least mention stormwater here. Or am I missing something?
Tim, I agree. Matter of fact, sitting on the JLIS advisory committee, when they originally drafted these recommendations, it was solely focused on impacts to the installations from county stormwater. And I highlighted that oftentimes there's impacts off installation as a result of stormwater on installation. So I think it's important to bring that in as well. So we'll make sure we get that added. And obviously with the impervious coverage of Peterson and the airport in general, a pretty significant impervious area. So it is important.
Yep,
But there is
thank
a
you.
little, this is Mark, there is a little difference, is Peterson's the only one that's inside the city limits. The rest of them are outside the city limits.
But to that extent, though, Mark, we've already seen some stormwater issues as a result of drainage from the airport. So I think it's important to highlight that, or at least put that recommendation in there.
We can address it.
Thank you.
And Craig,
There's already probably a recommendation out there, John, in the plan. We just need to drop it in.
Right.
Craig, this is Doug. My only comment on this section had to do with Schriever. Given that the city has at least made somewhat public their intention to annex to Schriever to provide utilities, should that be at least noted, discussed? Because that has other implications for county development, which you've noted, John and team have noted that the Highway 94 corridor is a potential area of rapid growth, which I agree with, but it might be rapid growth in the city as opposed to the county, depending upon what the city ultimately does with annexation.
Yeah, it might. I don't know, Doug. I don't know that I would do it necessarily specific to Schriever, though. I mean, with all of these installations, you're talking about compatibility with land use, both in the county and in the city. I mean, less so to the Air Force Academy, but maybe that's an initial comment in the formative pages when we first introduced military installations and say, the importance of land use compatibility with the military installations or growth around the military installations is not just a county consideration. It's also with the city of Colorado Springs, because whether it's Fort Carson or the Air Force Academy or Peterson, that is accurate. That's an accurate statement.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. The difference with most of those, though, is that they are either in the city or directly adjacent to city property. Schriever's a significant leapfrog, and so I don't feel strongly about it. We all know that topic's out there, and thought that we at least ought to bring it up.
I think when you overlay the key areas, which will include Schriever and that 2-mile notification zone, with the area of potential annexation, with the priority development area, it's probably going to make itself evident, but we could always add a sentence in here if we need to.
I'm not trying to make the document longer.
I don't know. That's not what I'm hearing.
This is Mark. If you would notice, Schriever's the only one that has utility development associated with it. Is there any logic to have utility associated with the other Air Force or the other bases?
Did that come out of the JLIS study, Sean? Do you know?
Yes.
I guess I don't think so, Mark, because CSU is serving all the other ones, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But we wouldn't have authority over any sort of utility development associated with the other installations regardless. That's my opinion. I don't know what the group thinks, but we would be kind of inserting ourselves in a conversation that we have no part of. I'll take silence as consent.
Any other questions about the military chapter? Any of the specific installation recommendations?
These have got to be the best photos in the entire plan. Those military photos are awesome.
Chapter 10 is recreation and tourism. Really centers around two things, parks and rec and tourism. Just as kind of a reminder, the state of Colorado has a statute requirement to include a tourism component for all comprehensive and master plans done in the state. So that's why this is outlined here specifically.
Sean, this draft does not incorporate the comments we got from Parks yet, right?
Correct.
Okay. So this
Yeah,
will get reworked a little bit.
Yeah. For example, the service area analysis section, the first paragraph will go away just to highlight the importance of what was done versus the gaps, for example. And then additional land, what some access stuff is, the regional trail connectivity. Safety along the trails, coordination there, and then coordination with state and federal land and the role it plays in terms of recreation and activity in the county. And then tourism, highlighting the Regional Tourism Act, and then the state statute requirements, and then some of the initiatives that have been undertaken throughout the county by different organizations and entities. And then some key focus areas for additional tourism components or expansion throughout the county, looking at arts and culture, sporting events, the shared economy, things like Airbnb, conventions, broadband access, and then some niche experiences.
Sean, can I stop you again?
Mm-hmm.
Craig, under additional land, and I was one of the people that brought up parks as part of the master plan and process, and because I think too few developers do a good job of this, but I was a little troubled by the statement, the construction of neighborhood and community parks should be undertaken by the developer as they specifically serve that particular neighborhood or subdivision. I'm in agreement on the neighborhood park. A community park by definition serves a drivable region. And I don't know, even the city doesn't require us to build community parks. They will often request us to build neighborhood parks, always dedicate the land, of course, but then sometimes, we can work out deals on building parks, which we do all the time. But I don't agree with that statement that a community park serves a neighborhood or a subdivision. By definition, that's just wrong.
Do you know, Sean, if this got reworked by Parks?
This is a specific statement from Parks. This sentence exactly.
I think what this is saying is county parks is they're not gonna construct anything other than a regional park. So any other smaller scale park, if it is going to be provided, is going to have to be provided by the developer and maintained by HOA or district. It's not going to be county parks. They're not interested in taking or constructing anything smaller than a regional park.
I agree. And if that's what it said, I wouldn't disagree with it. But when it says that a developer should build a community park because it only serves that particular neighborhood or subdivision, that is factually wrong.
Yeah, maybe we can rework it to talk about smaller scale, smaller than a regional park or something like that, that serves a smaller geographic area. I would rather leave the conversation a little more open to give it more flexibility in what a certain area might need in the future, instead of calling it a certain name. I mean, the term of art to me is irrelevant. It's who's building it, who's going to maintain it.
I agree, but in the development community, a neighborhood park is generally a park of 7 acres or less that serves that neighborhood. A community park by definition serves a drivable, and I think the definition the city uses is, Andrea probably knows, 10 or 15 minute drive. I'll give you an example. I put a 25-acre community park in one of my deals, but it was a natural, and we connected it in the equestrian. Sorry, that's my phone.
Doug, I think my point is, we just need to make it clear the county's not in the business of doing neighborhood or community.
No, I agree with that. And I just don't want something that has a potential for significant misinterpretation. So I'll wait and see what your revision looks like.
Yeah, I think if it just says classic will build community parks, I think that's fine.
Yep.
Any other comments for the recreation and tourism chapter?
Doug, I'm going to note for the record, Andrea smiled when I said that, so I think she agrees.
I was laughing
On the
because I was
last
gonna
page.
say that's about the only way you're going to get them.
And we do have one, and people drive their horse buggies or they trailer their horses in from 30 miles away to ride their horses.
Yeah, I was gonna, on the spending growth for tourism on the last page, I just think we would want to tweak the title. It's not county spending, it's visitor spending. So maybe just say
Right.
visitor spending growth, something like that, just to make it clear that we're not spending money. It's not, and it's not exactly income either, but we're
Right.
not spending money. So just a tweak.
Right. Good catch.
This is Mark. I would note that there was a change in law a few years ago that said the county has to have a recreation tourism element to their master plan. We've not here directly adopted what the element is, the destination master plan, but we brought parts of it into this master plan to comply with that state law.
That's one of the few things that state statute says has to be in a master plan, believe it or not. The list is pretty short, and that's one of them.
And that is, from having worked all over the country in 30 plus states, that's unique to Colorado. Every state has, or most states have some unique component that is unique to their state. But tourism is so crucial to the state that they feel as though it needs to be crucial then to the counties and the municipalities. So it's a collective effort up and down the spectrum. So they don't state to what extent it has to be addressed. It's just that it has to be an element of the plan. So.
Chapter 11 is community health. This chapter as well was pulled from studies completed by the health department in the county. So the health indicators report, findings from there, recommendations from that report, as well as the health impact plan. And then looking at the built environment, some physical development recommendations for improving community health. The food access in particular is largely based around the food access study that the health department did, I believe, in 2019. Pretty short chapter. Any comments, questions there?
Mine isn't a substantive comment, other than I just think I think your sentence under walking and biking in the second paragraph, that first sentence, I think just doesn't read well. I think it's grammatically incorrect. So I'm not offering a suggestion. The communities everywhere, including those in El Paso County, are successfully demonstrating better a quality of life side. That just doesn't work, I don't think.
Yeah,
Yep,
A
correct.
is definitely in the wrong spot.
I think it needs to be A better than better A.
Yeah, yeah.
You see how thorough Doug went through this? That's incredible.
I'm impressed.
Don't be. I just know Craig is going to be beating me over the head with this for years to come. It was self-preservation.
Any other comments for the community health chapter? Okay. Chapter 12 is environment, kind of carrying forward that overarching environmental considerations theme, focusing on water features, less from the infrastructure perspective, but what's kind of existing and available, natural resources and land conservation, wildlife and the role that plays within the environment of the county and how it relates to, development opportunities, and then wastewater management.
My only comment here is I prefer rodent instead of mouse when you label the Prebles Meadows jumping mouse.
Now, Doug. Now.
That mouse has cost the state of Colorado about $400 million, and they can't even prove it's a separate species.
I don't think our plan is going to be able to do that.
Now, this, Mark, I would note that we've received some comments from the Parks Department, the Environmental Services section, that are not, I don't believe, incorporated in here yet. So there'll be a few changes in some of this section.
Also, probably important to highlight, Doug, that U.S. Fish and Wildlife is starting a new effort with regard to the mouse habitat, and was looking for local participation. I think environmental is going to participate in that, so you can look forward to that opportunity. Maybe the habitat area will get remapped.
In a good way or in a bad way?
I'll just leave it at maybe it'll get remapped.
Well, I think a business opportunity, you can make little lounge chairs for these rodents and sell them, and they'll probably make us put lounge chairs and plazas and stuff for them to hang out in.
Oh, if we could expect it from any developer, it would be classic.
We were working in a comprehensive plan. I think it was in Montgomery, Illinois, where there was a woman who was starting up a local environmental group. And at the public hearing at the end for adoption, she came with signs and stuff. And what she was upset about was, and I'm not joking, that the plan didn't provide for, as she put it, the little mice that lived on the west side of town and the little mice that lived on the east side of town. And we needed to have what she called something like mouseways to allow all species to be able to get to wherever they needed to hang out with the other members of their species within the city. But she actually said the plan should have mouseways. I'm not making that up.
It's called the sewer system.
Yeah.
Hey, John, you don't happen to have her phone number? I could call her and get some ideas, do you?
You have to have an abundance of patience to do your job.
That's but we were at one meeting, and these two sisters were at the front, and they were commenting on stuff. And they were probably, I don't know, they were in their 80s or so, about 100 people in the room, and standing in the back of the room, I won't say what community this was, standing in the back of the room as these two women were speaking, saying some really crazy stuff, was the mayor. And the mayor was standing in the back of the room. Nobody could see him. He's looking at me going like this. It's just, it's very difficult. But yeah, mouseways. So you guys are ahead of the curve.
Any other comments for the environment chapter? Okay. So the last one, resiliency and hazard mitigation. Resiliency planning. Again, this chapter also pulls largely from existing studies and plans done throughout both the county and the state. Blizzards, wildfires, drought, flooding. And then disaster recovery and resiliency. A large part of this is centered around coordinating and continuing to coordinate with the Office of Emergency Management for the work that they do already. And that is it. That is the end of the document.
This is Mark. I would note that it's so recent that it's hard to get included is the county's adopted a new multi-hazard jurisdictional plan in November. I don't know if we should reference that in any way.
Mark, we have, this entire section has been revised to include recommendations from the 2020 update.
Yeah.
A large part of them have not changed, just for context.
Well, thanks everybody for going through all 13 chapters. That was, I think, a pretty pain-free experience, felt like. Great comments. We will, Mark, maybe if you want to go through the tentative schedule at this point, what we anticipate moving forward for this group.
Sure. The plan going forward is we're meeting this afternoon to take these comments with the consultant. Then we're meeting on Friday with DOT, who had some substantial comments and consultants or questions. The original plan had the information be sent to the consultants after those meetings, which will probably happen on Friday, unless we find some other things that we haven't marked up. The consultant would be providing next week a revised plan to reflect all these comments. Then we would, after that time period, we're trying to now schedule a Board of Commissioners presentation as a report item, tentatively March 9th. And at that point, we would then release the document to the public associated with either getting the final version of this based on these comments and the presentation to the Board of Commissioners. Then we start the release to the public and a public engagement process going forward that will carry through March into April. And then those public comments then become the last version of this before we start to take it to the Planning Commission in a May timeframe. We have certain advertisements and things to go forward. It takes 2 actions by the Planning Commission to adopt. We're potentially thinking of a separate date from the Planning Commission in May rather than using since they're so busy, using their regular schedule. We're looking in May, ending, I think, at the 25th of May for their final action. We intend to advertise in the newspapers. The public comment process will be handled by our PIO office. That's the office that's also producing Community Engage that will be released at the end of this month. Our Community Engage tomorrow on the master plan. They'll be handling most of the public involvement in the advertisements as we go forward. But there is some opportunity. Generally, Craig assigns me this somehow to go to various public meetings or presentations, etc. NEPCO is requested, which is Northern El Paso County's requested a presentation in May. There's other opportunities that we could come to groups or provide videos or link the Community Engage to those entities for presentations. We anticipate some articles potentially in the Falcon newspaper, which is a monthly paper. They are community news in the northern part of the county, and we intend to do some advertising as well, leading up to the Planning Commission's action in May.
So John and Sean, and thanks for tolerating my comments, but candidly, for a 141-page document, the material affects my industry, I had really few comments. I mean, in the big picture, the comments were fairly, sometimes they were pointed, but they were fairly few. I thought it was a very well done draft. With that said, Craig and Mark, the reason I raised that is I've raised my comments in these last two meetings. I haven't felt compelled to send separate documentation. I went through the minutes to see if the comments from last time were reflected in the minutes, and I felt they were. So I'm really not planning on submitting written comments to you, Mark or Craig. I've given you those, and I'll just wait to see the next draft.
And Nina is on here too. She was noting the comments as they were being made verbally. So we're adding them to the list of needed changes. So anything we discussed during this meeting was not just discussion, it was also memorialized and will be reflected in the change document.
And I also did that for the prior meeting. We brought those comments from the committee into that table that shows all those prior comments.
And I think what I'd like to do, Sean and Mark and Nina, is keep adding to that table how it was addressed in the plans, and then we can provide that to this advisory committee, maybe offline, and say, here's how we're addressing the comment that you provided, if we're addressing it, or if it's off base, we'll explain why we didn't think it was appropriate. But I think that's going to be few and far between. Most of them were either discussed during these two meetings or are kind of textual changes that are just cleanup.
Yeah, it's a good strategy.
And I would note also, Doug and Andrea, I know you guys represent the HBA in this committee. I believe we also have a meeting scheduled to do a presentation to the Public Policy Committee. So
yeah, next month.
Yeah, so we'll be providing an update there. And I guess as the two representatives, I would look for you guys to talk a little bit about what you've reviewed, because obviously I don't expect everybody to review all 141 pages of it before that meeting, but maybe a summary of how you feel it has been constructed, and then we can provide an overview of the plan itself.
Okay.
Doug, do you have any, being on city, and Andrea being on city plans as they went forward, are there any other suggestions of public involvement or ways to distribute the document, or groups that we might need to speak to?
I don't really know what groups you've spoken to so far kind of comprehensively, so that's a bit difficult to answer, but I think you've done a good job at the public outreach. Given the COVID restrictions, I'm really not sure what else you could do right now. Doug, do you have any, you were more heavily involved in Plan COS, do you have anything?
No, the approach was similar. Meet with stakeholder groups, publish. They did some, a little bit more walking around, surveying, et cetera. But truthfully, I mean, you're talking about a geographic area that is so vast here. Yeah. I think you've done a good job of reaching out to the individual stakeholders or collective stakeholders. And from there, I don't really have any real suggestions other than the things you guys have already talked about implementing.
And I would extend the invitation, just like Mark said, maybe reiterating, if you have groups that you're a part of that you would like for us to engage with, to just update them on what the county's doing. If you feel like that's a group that conversation is appropriate for, we'd be happy to try to schedule that time.
Okay.
Well, listening to this conversation, the Airport Advisory Commission, or the city airport, has requested a presentation there.
Can I ask a question about the final chapter?
Sure.
Implementation chapter?
Yeah, will we have a separate, or do we need a separate meeting to review that chapter as a committee, or will we just review that as part of the final draft that comes out?
John, do you have a preference on that?
No, we can do it either way. I mean, these meetings, I think, aside from having the scheduled time that everybody can make, once we get that drafted and staff has reviewed it and commented and we make revisions, we can get that out. And if we wanted to have a quick meeting call to go through it, and that's fine with me. I don't think it has to be folded into part of the final deliverable and looked at in its entirety. I think there might be some benefit to looking at maybe a brief meeting, which is fine. So maybe once it's ready for your review, we send it out to everybody and then we can straw poll. Do you just want to give us your feedback? Or do you want to have a meeting to review and discuss this? We're open to that. That's fine.
I think a meeting would be good either way. A lot of it is what you're going to see is basically bringing forward the things that you've already reviewed into the
Right.
implementation chapter. There's going to be some new things that we talked about in terms of how to evaluate things that maybe are not directly consistent with a place type, maybe on its face, like variances or special uses, and how to look at those through the context of the master plan. So some of that will be new, but most of it will be generally a repeat of some of the policies and goals we've already discussed during these 13 chapters. But I think a meeting just to have that discussion is probably appropriate. So we'll find a time for that once we get the chapter drafted.
Okay, thank you.
Are we at the point of probably having public comment now? I've had some text from Randy Case. I know he has some things he'd like to say. If he can actually get on and speak, he's in a hotel somewhere, and if not, I can relay his comments.
So technically, Randy is a liaison member. He's not public technically, I
Okay.
guess. So, maybe that's a good idea, is take any comments from liaison members first and then go to the public.
Well, let's try and get Randy on, and if not, I can, like I say, I can pass on his comments.
Yeah. Randy, if you want to unmute yourself, you can speak.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for all you're doing. I just thought that maybe there would be some common goals, and maybe I've overlooked it, but more general regionalization priority of encouraging the collaborations between developments, between the governments, and more often it becomes utilities and transportation probably, and stormwater, but I just don't know that I've seen that as a general regionalization kind of goal.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. We can see if there's opportunities to put that language in the chapters we've reviewed. In the implementation chapter, the chapter that's yet to come, one of the things that is addressed is regional and multi-jurisdictional cooperation and coordination. So that's usually a section that is given a little bit of real estate in the implementation section on how to implement the plan. But we can look to see if there's other places in the document we can stress that, because clearly the success of achieving a lot of these things is going to be dependent upon the county working with and coordinating with others. So your point is well taken. And again, that gets addressed specifically in the implementation chapter as a means through which the plan gets implemented over time. But we can look to see if there's other places in the document we can put that as well, because you're exactly right. That's key. So.
Thank you. That's all.
Okay.
It also has its own section in the community facilities chapter currently.
Right. Yeah, I was gonna say, I think we specifically addressed it. It's just in chapters 1 through 6, and I don't know if Randy, you were on last week or not.
No, I haven't gotten to hear that yet.
Okay, yeah, and we talk about it a little bit on potential annexation areas, I think priority development areas, and then also the municipality key areas, some of that discussion. So I think it's sort of kind of laced throughout, but if we need to put a finer point on it, we can find somewhere for that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any other liaison members that are on, Sean, that would like to comment? They could maybe send a message to Sean.
Yeah, I do have some questions from some other folks with the city and the military installations. I don't know if we want to take those yet.
I think that's fine. Andrea, are you okay with just moving forward with non-liaison members and looking at the other agencies?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, some of these are pretty straightforward. So Kevin Curry mentioned that maybe we should note in the section around wind farms in the infrastructure chapter that some of the wind power serves other regions, not just those in the county. I think that's a pretty straightforward fix, just adding that sentence that says wind energy. It doesn't solely stay within the county.
I think you could say the same for all energy, because once those electrons get into the grid, they go wherever they send them.
Yeah, so that's a quick fix. And then
It's
Amy
not
Kelly.
Texas.
Yeah. And then Amy Kelly with the Air Force Academy just mentioned that the facts on population and acreage for the Air Force Academy are not representing the right numbers for the Academy. It looks like they're just a copy paste from Cheyenne, so we can fix that. We have those numbers. I think we just duplicated the same numbers. So that's everyone there. And then I think we just got one more. Amy, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, it was that one. I wasn't sure if I was typing my question into the correct chat function or not. So that was my one comment about the facts and figures. And then when we get an opportunity to review the document, I'm sure we'll provide some more comments. Thank you.
Amy, I thought those facts and figures came from the JLIS.
No, it's just a copy paste.
You put them in the wrong place.
Yeah, we're duplicating the ones for Cheyenne.
Oh, okay. Slightly higher at the Academy, probably.
Yep.
Just a little.
Just checking here. So then Judy just noted that the sound dropped off during Mark's presentation about public outreach and when that will be conducted. Will the review draft be electronic only, hard copy? So the draft for public outreach, I believe we decided on using some newer tools available. So we're going to try and use some new web-based tools to present the plan here. It will be a high-level summary of the key components of the document to make it easier to digest for public review. And it's going to be an Esri story map. So when that's ready and available, that will be on the plan website for people to go in and review the key draft plan components.
John, will the whole document be available? Is that what Judy was asking too?
I believe that's part of her question. I think that's something we still need to determine internally as a project team and how we share that with the public.
I think we need to share the whole document. If we need to post it on the project website, if it's too large to put into, I don't remember the program name, Sean. Sorry.
Story map.
But the story map, if it's too large to put in there, that's one thing. I think we were really looking at a lot of the mapping efforts as being important for story map to put in there, because it makes it more real for the people who are engaging in that. Where do I live and what does it say for where I live? But if we need to put the full plan, I want to put the full plan out there either on our website or on the master plan website.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. A PDF of the whole document should be available for review, because it's not practical to put the whole document in the story map format.
Right. It's 100 and, well, it'll be over 150 pages probably by the time we're done. So But we want to put it out there so that the public can see everything that is in this plan.
Absolutely, yeah. Story maps is an easier way for people to walk through it and hit the high notes and see what's in it, and to have interactive maps as opposed to static PDF on a page. So there's advantages to story maps, but it's not conducive to putting the entire document into story maps. So we'll do both.
To reference, if Judy's listening now and we got cut off or the sound got cut off, is after receipt of the next version of the draft, then we start that public outreach, public review going forward. Hopefully with a presentation May 9th with the Board of Commissioners, then it's released, and then that public review can occur all through March and into April. And then with that public review, then we start the Planning Commission hearing process in May.
Judy, does that address your question? Judy, you're unmuted and available to speak if you have any other questions. If not, those are the only questions we have so far. So. Haven't seen anyone else raise their hand or type a question, so I believe that's it.
Yep.
Okay, well, thanks everybody. Great comments, great discussion. Real proud of how this is shaping up. Hopefully you all are too. 30 years later, we're updating our master plan and looking towards the future. So pretty exciting time. Those of you on our planning commission, you're going to get to see it in its entirety 2 more times at least. So I think it's a pretty important time for El Paso County, and this document is certainly part of that. So thank you all for your participation, comments, willingness to review 100 and some odd pages. That's a pretty big ask.
It's a lot.
But great comments. I'm genuinely glad each of you is on our committee, because I think you each brought something very different to the discussion, and I think it's going to make it a much better plan.
I agree. I agree.
All right, Andrea, anything else today?
No, I think that's good.
Okay.
All right. I guess we can sign off. Thank you, everybody, for your
everyone.
diligence in reading everything. All right. Bye.
Stay warm and
Bye.
dry.
Thanks, everyone.